for newsletter, read some product information. If you have an online transaction, they maybe buy some products online. But to be honest with you, how many are really making a transaction or a sign up? Only a small percentage. And most of the users come to your website and leave without doing anything. And with remarketing, you can re-engage with them and say, hey guys, come back to my website. And I'll explain it later in more details what this means. And then you have non-search branded keyword terms like at the bottom it was like Motorola, Nokia, BlackBerry, Apple, and so on. And search non-branded keywords are products descriptions like digital camera cheap or digital camera 5 megapixel and so on. These keywords are very, very broad because with different languages there are huge varieties of keywords that are powerful for you, but they can bring you amazing results, and here you have to just to see what works best for you. Then there's display contextual and interests and topics, and I'll talk about that in a few seconds later in more detail. So let's start with the first step, planning. For planning, like I said, we have one central tool. The tool that we currently use is Ad Planner. We also use this internally, by the way. Our own sales teams also use Ad Planner for planning of display campaigns. What can you do there? You just log in. It's a free tool available for everyone. You log in and you can see what are the websites in Egypt that are, for example, allowing ads on the display network on mobile. What are, let's say, the websites in UAE that are from a finance industry on the Google Display Network? So there is a huge opportunity to discover what's going on in the Google Display Network specifically, and what makes maybe sense for you to target with your campaigns. So yes, there was a change in Ad Planner recently, and there will be a lot of more changes in the future too. So I unfortunately cannot go into the details because we're a very early stage of developing, let's say, a better version of Ad Planner. But we definitely know that this is a tool that is important for you, but we want to make the experience even better for you. So right now, very easy, you can check out what are, let's say, impressions on the individual website and see also, for example, mobile apps traffic, and decide what makes sense to pick for a campaign. The other tool is a placement tool in the AdWords interface. When you have AdWords, you can sign up and do similar research in the AdWords interface. Buying is clearly AdWords. AdWords is really a big success story, and when you would have told me 9 years ago when I joined Google that this is so big today, I'm like, no way, I'm not convinced. But it is one of the biggest advertising platforms that we have, clearly, in the industry that had a huge impact on online. Why? Because it's a solution for everyone. I've seen success stories from different markets, from different industries, that are even like, let's say, wow for me. It doesn't matter if it's a small business in Lebanon, if it's a big company like Amazon in the US, if it's let's really an offline player somewhere in Albania who is just selling shoes. I've seen success stories for all kind of businesses. The only thing that all of them have in common is they believe in online and they measure their results. And when we have a look at our top advertising spenders with AdWords, those are not necessarily the usual suspects like the Coca-Colas or the Mercedes of this world. We have a lot of our top spenders are very small businesses. So we have advertisers, 3-man business, who spends with us hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe even millions, not because they are filthy rich and can just spend money, because they measure everything and only invest as much money into advertising as they get out of it. So they exactly know their key metrics and can say, I invest $5 and I get $15 out of it. When this calculation no longer works, when they spend more than they get out of it, they stop it. or reduce the click price and make it at a different stage. And the really, really powerful thing about this is also it's allowing you to do things at a global scale. When I see businesses from, like I said, I was last week in Ukraine, there are businesses in Ukraine who target the whole world now and are making business around the world, although they have no local presence, actually in no other country, just doing everything out of Ukraine. Depending on the business, of course, that you're in, it heavily varies, but online has a huge, huge opportunity to do a lot of things at scale in other markets, to discover what's potentially happening in other markets, to see if there are opportunities for you to do business. And that's one of the really, really powerful things about online. That's why I work in online. You set up your campaigns in AdWords, and you, of course, need to define the targeting. So you define, okay, I want to target desktop computers, I want to target mobile devices only maybe, and you say, I want to target whole Egypt or only certain parts of Egypt. If you have, for example, let's say you're in the finance industry and your business is you're selling loans to customers, you have a call center and you set up a campaign, make sure you only have the campaigns active when your call center is active. Sounds like a very logical thing, but I've seen a lot of customers having online campaigns 24 hours with a recommendation and link, call us here to get a quote for a loan, but then their call center was inactive for, let's say, more than 10 hours. So they just wasted the money, basically. So you have a lot of setup that you can do for your campaigns to be very successful. Who do you think is knowing the customer very well? So most of the businesses that exist have an idea what their customers are. But the customer or the user is very often the question mark, and it's unpredictable. You don't know necessarily who is your perfect customer. You have some ideas, you have some target groups, of course, but sometimes you would be really surprised who brings you business. It can be from a very different age group, or it can come from a very different country, but also from different interests, for example. And for the Google Display Network, we offer different ways how you can set up and target, let's say, users who are surfing the web. We have one is interest targeting, the other one is remarketing, the third one is similar users, and the fourth one is contextual targeting. And let's spend a few minutes in the individual ones. So we have remarketing. Remarketing is basically target users who've been on your website and try to re-engage with them. When you already have users who come to your website, that's a big, let's say, step. You can spend a huge amount of money on online campaigns to bring users to your websites, millions. If your website is bad, they will leave. So make sure your website is user-friendly, and there are a lot of great tools out there who help you to make sure your website is one that users would like to stay on, to read articles about your products, about news, and so on. And with remarketing, you can say, hey, come back to me at a later stage when they're somewhere else in the web. Good example is, let's assume you sell a PlayStation. You sell a PlayStation and you also, of course, sell other related products for PlayStation. Customer was on your website and ordered a PlayStation. Very good story, you made your money, customer left. With remarketing, you have the opportunity to re-engage with this customer, let's say 30 days later, and say, by the way, do you also want to buy some new games? So you can really set up a strategy for your campaign to re-engage with a customer who was already doing business with you, but now you can make them a loyal customer and make sure he's coming back. And chances are really, really high that he's doing business with you again when he had in the first process a really good customer experience and everything was working very well. Contextual. Very, very powerful. Whenever it's in the right context, we show the ad to the user to make sure it's a good fit. and interest categories, which I'll show you in a second what that specifically means also live. So contextual targeting is offered by a few players in the industry, but that's still by far Google's most successful display product. So you have a product or service, like you sell digital cameras, like the usual suspects, Sony, Panasonic, and so on, and your ad would show up whenever an article is about this specific product. It's happening fully automatically. We screen a website for individual words and then understand the concept of the website and put the right ads next to it. And this is very advanced, and I can give you one example is, you maybe heard of Java. Java has a lot of different meanings. Java can be coffee, Java, coffee beans. It can be, let's say, the programming language, but it can also be, of course, the part of Indonesia. So completely different meanings. And when you're, for example, now offering a service for tourism in this part of Indonesia, you, of course, do not want to show up necessarily in the context with Java programming languages or with coffee beans, because it's not relevant for you. But our algorithm is so clever to understand the different concepts. So it would check, okay, Java is on the website, is coffee mentioned somewhere else? Or is it, let's say, Indonesia mentioned somewhere else? So to make sure we deliver the right ad for you. And this, by the way, works not only in English, it also works in other languages. So not to confuse you. It works for all kind of languages that we are offering for our AdWords campaigns. Interest categories. Interest categories is basically behavioral targeting, audience targeting, but with a slightly different approach. So we've seen over the last year, especially what I find interesting in emerging markets, a very, very huge adoption of interest categories. And I'll tell you why, because it's very easy to set up. We have the opportunity to show different users different ads. Still today, the majority of the ads are kind of targeted, but most of the users, they see the same ad. So if you're a big business, you say, hey, I want to show up with my product and service for one day in this portal. You, of course, target basically everyone and not individual audiences or target groups. What today is changing the industry a lot is that you have ads for all kind of users. Users that are young, that are old, that are interested in sport, that are interested in let's say, in news, that are interested in clothing. So there are lots of ways to better target users. And the more you know about your user, the better you can set up your campaign. The better you can set up let's say, the message you set up for them. So how does this work? So when you're a user, you go to a website and you see there's an AdSense slot from Google implemented, you see ads. We drop a cookie on your user's machine. So that's a typical industry standard, that's not only from Google. This is how this whole thing works. We drop a cookie on your machine, and then we basically follow your website visiting behavior and have an individual profile for you. And this is how it looks like. And I think I'll just show you live my own individual example, and you can do the same on your computer. So just go to Google, go to Ads, Preference, Manager, search for that, pick the first result, and then you see my own individual profile based on my website visiting behavior. These are my main categories where I spend my time on. So you see, I travel a lot. I spend a lot of time on travel websites. I live in Paris. I read a lot about what's going on in Paris. I spend a good amount of time on photo and video sharing websites. I read about the weather, and so on and so on. So these are my 10 main interest categories over the last 30 days. And with interest category from Google, you can target these categories. We have nearly 2,000 categories, very, very granular categories to to target them better. So